My father didn't ask. He told me at dinner, calm as if he were reading the weather. Your sister needs a proper space, Carrie. You can work from anywhere. I didn't argue. I went to my room, packed what mattered, and left before sunrise. By the time they woke up, I was gone. By the time they finished breakfast, the calls had started. They haven't stopped since. The laptop on my desk was open to a folder I had quietly built over 3 years. Passwords, account numbers, subscriptions, utility logins. Every invisible thread that kept the Walton household running without anyone noticing who was pulling it. I looked at the list and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, something quieter than that. Clarity. I glanced around my home office, the one I had turned a bare spare room into with my own money, my own weekends, my own stubbornness. The standing desk, the filing system, the good lighting I bought because the overhead bulb gave me headaches. This was not just a room. It was the only place in that house where I was allowed to be something other than useful. My name is Carrie Walton. I was 29 years old, and until the night I left, my family had no idea that the house they lived in ran on me. If you want to know how one quiet decision dismantled everything a family had taken for granted, stay with me, because this story is just getting started. The office started as a punishment room. That was what my mother called it when I was 12. The small spare bedroom at the end of the hall where broken furniture went to wait and forgotten boxes went to stay forever. It smelled like old carpet and the particular sadness of things no one wanted. When I turned 26 and came back home to cut my expenses while I built my client base, that room was still exactly as I had left it. Boxes, dust, a chair with one cracked leg leaning against the wall like it had given up. I fixed it myself. Not all at once, slowly, the way you do things when you are spending your own money and every decision counts. I pulled the carpet up on a Saturday and found decent hardwood underneath. I painted the walls a clean, quiet gray. I bought a second-hand desk and sanded it down until it looked intentional. I ran a cable line and set up a router dedicated only to my work because I had learned early that trying to run client calls over the family's shared connection was a reliable way to sound unprofessional at the worst possible moments. I put a lock on the door. That part mattered more than anything else. From that room, I had built something real. 3 years of freelance bookkeeping had turned into a steady roster of small business clients who trusted me with their numbers, their anxieties, their quarterly disasters. I worked early mornings before the house woke up and late nights after it went quiet. I filed taxes, reconciled accounts, caught errors that would have cost people more than they wanted to think about. I was good at it. Inside that room, I was allowed to be good at it. What no one in my family fully understood, or chose to understand, was that the money I earned in that office did not stay only with me. The grocery runs that appeared without discussion. The internet bill that somehow always got paid. The car insurance renewal that my father mentioned once with a vague air of expectation, and never mentioned again because it was always handled. I had never handed anyone a statement or asked for acknowledgement. I simply absorbed what needed absorbing, the way I always had. The way the room at the end of the hall had once absorbed everything no one knew what to do with. I had turned that room into something valuable. It had not occurred to me, until recently, that my family had done the same thing with me. It was a Sunday dinner, which in the Walton house had always been the preferred setting for decisions that had already been made. My mother had cooked, which meant the table was full, and the mood was calibrated toward compliance. It is harder to object when someone has spent 3 hours making your favorite meal. My father sat at the head of the table with the particular stillness of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say. Bruce was beside him, working through his second plate with the focused contentment of someone who already knew the agenda and had no problem with it. Frances was on her phone until my mother gave her a look, and then she set it face down and folded her hands with the performance of someone practicing patience. My father cleared his throat. He said Frances had been struggling to find her footing. He said she had real potential. He used that word, potential, the way people do when they mean something vague, but feel strongly about it. He said what she needed was a proper space, somewhere she could focus, build something for herself. He said it the way people announce good news, with a kind of generous brightness that assumes everyone at the table will share in the warmth of it. Then he said she could use my office. He did not ask. There was no pause left open for a question. He moved from the announcement directly to the logistics. Frances would move in at the end of the month. Carrie could set up in the living room or the kitchen. Carrie was flexible. Carrie could work anywhere. That was the thing about Carrie. She always figured it out. I looked at my mother. She was nodding with the careful expression of a woman who had already had a different version of this conversation in private and had made her peace with it. I looked at Bruce, who glanced at me briefly and then returned to his plate with the practiced neutrality of someone who has decided the kindest thing he can offer is silence. I looked at Frances, who was looking at the table with an expression I could not fully read. Not guilty, not grateful, somewhere between the two and committed to neither. I waited for someone to ask me anything, how I felt, whether this worked for me. Whether the business I had been running from that room for 3 years might have an opinion about being displaced. No one asked. My father picked up his fork. My mother started talking about dessert, and just like that, the matter was settled. I did not sleep that night, not because I was crying or raging or rehearsing the things I should have said at the dinner table. I lay in the dark with my eyes open, and I did something I had never permitted myself to do before. I started adding it up. Not in the loose, impressionistic way I had occasionally allowed myself when I was tired and resentful and then immediately felt guilty about. I mean, I actually added it up, the way I would for a client, methodically, line by line. The grocery run started in 2021, when my mother's back made long trips to the store difficult, and my father declared himself too busy without specifying for what. I had absorbed that without comment. The internet bill followed 2 months later, when my parents switched providers, and somehow the new account ended up in my name, with my card attached. The car insurance came next. My father's, then eventually my mother's, folded into my monthly expenses so gradually that I could not have told you exactly when it happened, only that at some point it simply was. There were the household subscriptions I managed because no one else understood how. The appliance repair I had coordinated when the washing machine failed, and my mother called me at work as though I were the building superintendent. The medications I had quietly refilled when my father forgot, and my mother didn't want to ask him again. None of it had ever been acknowledged as a system. That was the thing I kept returning to in the dark. It had never been named, never been negotiated, never been thanked in any way that suggested the person doing the thanking understood the scale of what they were receiving. It was simply expected, and I had simply delivered, and everyone had agreed without words to treat this as the natural order of things. I had spent 3 years telling myself this was love, that showing up quietly, absorbing costs, smoothing friction, that this was how you demonstrated care for people who were not always easy to care for. I had told myself the arrangement was temporary. I had told myself they would notice eventually. Lying in the dark the night after that dinner, I finally stopped telling myself those things. What I had built in that house was not love freely given. It was a service, rendered consistently and received without question. And the moment my father looked across the table and handed my space to someone else without a moment's hesitation, he had shown me exactly what he thought my service was worth. Nothing I wasn't already providing. By morning, I had made up my mind. There was no dramatic moment attached to it. No breaking point, no final straw that snapped loudly enough to mark the occasion. I simply woke up, made coffee, and understood with complete calm that I was leaving. The decision had the quiet, settled quality of something that had been true for a long time before I was ready to look at it directly. I want to be clear about what I did not do. I did not go downstairs and make an announcement. I did not write a letter detailing every grievance, every bill, every Sunday dinner where my name had been used as a solution to someone else's problem. I did not call Bruce to see whose side he would take, because I already knew and it no longer mattered. I did not confront my father or ask my mother to intervene, or give Frances the satisfaction of knowing she had been the last thing that broke something I had been holding together for years. I finished my coffee, I opened my laptop, and I started making a list. This is what I know how to do. Not fight, not perform, not appeal to people's better nature and wait to be disappointed. I know how to assess a situation, identify the variables, and build a plan that accounts for all of them. I had done it for clients in genuine crisis, businesses hemorrhaging money with no idea where the bleeding was coming from. I approached my own exit the same way, clinically, thoroughly, without sentiment. The list had 3 columns. What I needed to find: a new space, a short-term lease I could move into quickly, somewhere with reliable internet and enough quiet to work. What I needed to move: equipment, files, the external drives with 3 years of client data, the things in that office that were mine in every sense that mattered. And what I needed to untangle: every account, every subscription, every automatic payment that currently ran through my name, my card, my quiet and unconditional participation in the maintenance of a household that had never once asked if the arrangement was working for me. That 3rd column was the longest. I looked at it for a while without surprise. I gave myself 1 week, not because I needed the time emotionally, but because I needed it logistically. A clean exit required preparation, and I had not spent 3 years managing other people's financial chaos to make a mess of my own departure. I closed the laptop, got dressed, and went to work as usual. No one at the breakfast table noticed anything different. The week passed the way most careful things do, quietly and without incident. I had found the apartment on the 2nd day of searching, a 1-bedroom on the 7th floor of a building 20 minutes from my primary clients, with dedicated fiber internet, a second room small enough to be ignored by anyone visiting, but large enough for a desk, 2 monitors, and the filing cabinet I had bought with my first real paycheck. The landlord was efficient and unbothered. I signed the lease on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 client calls, folded the copy into my bag, and drove home for dinner as though nothing had changed. Because as far as anyone in that house could tell, nothing had. That was the part I had planned most carefully. Not the moving, the invisibility of the moving. I had watched enough people leave badly to understand that the moment you signal an exit, the people you are leaving begin to negotiate, manipulate, or simply make the process as difficult as they are capable of making it. I had no interest in any of that. So I worked in the margins of my normal routine, methodically, without urgency, like a woman simply staying on top of her administrative tasks. The grocery deliveries were the first thing I redirected. A small change to the account settings, a removed payment method, a notification email that would arrive after I was gone. The internet bill came next. I called the provider on my lunch break, had my name removed from the account, and listened to the representative confirm the change with the same detachment I would bring to canceling a magazine subscription. The utilities followed, one by one, each adjustment small enough to mean nothing in isolation. I moved my equipment in stages: a monitor in the trunk on Wednesday, the external drives in my bag on Thursday, the client files in a box I carried out on Friday morning, while my mother was on a call and my father was watching something in the living room. No one asked what was in the box. No one looked up. By Saturday, the office held my desk, my chair, and the things I had decided to leave behind, which is to say, the things that had never really been mine to begin with. The room already felt like it belonged to someone else. Perhaps it always had, and I had simply refused to see it. I made one final pass through the house that evening, checking quietly for anything I had missed. I hadn't missed anything. I never did. I set my alarm for 3 a.m., though I was already awake when it went off. I had slept lightly, not from anxiety, but from the particular alertness of someone who has an early flight and does not want to miss it. I turned the alarm off before it made a sound, sat up in the dark, and took one slow breath. Then I got up and got to work. The last of the boxes were stacked by the door. 4 of them, plus my laptop bag and the small duffel I had packed the night before, with the things I would need immediately. I had arranged for a friend with a van to meet me outside at 3:30, no questions asked, in exchange for breakfast and my genuine gratitude. She arrived 2 minutes early. I had always liked that about her. We loaded everything in under 20 minutes. The house stayed dark and quiet the entire time. I had oiled the front door hinges 3 days earlier, a small detail that had occurred to me at 2 in the morning, and that I had added to my list without examining too closely what it said about me that I thought of it at all. I went back inside one last time, not to reconsider. I want to be precise about that. There was no moment of hesitation at the threshold, no last look around that carried any grief in it. I went back inside because I had left an envelope on the kitchen counter, and I wanted to make sure it was visible. It was. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the account numbers and provider details for the utilities now in my parents' names, the Wi-Fi login for the basic plan I had downgraded them to, and a brief note explaining that the grocery delivery account had been closed. I did not write anything else. There was nothing else that needed saying that the morning would not say more plainly than I could. I pulled the front door close behind me. The latch caught with a small, clean sound. My friend was waiting at the curb with the engine running and the heat on. She handed me a coffee she had brought in a thermos without being asked. I got in, set the coffee in the cup holder, and looked straight ahead as she pulled away from the curb. I did not look back at the house, not because it was hard, because it wasn't. And I think some part of me had always known that when the moment finally came, it would feel less like leaving and more like arriving. The first call came at 8:14 a.m. I know this because I was already at my new desk, the monitor set up, the filing cabinet in the corner where I had decided it would go, a fresh coffee steaming beside my keyboard. I had been awake since 6. I had already responded to 2 client emails and logged into my accounting software to confirm the remote access was clean and uninterrupted. The apartment was quiet in the way that only new spaces are, not empty, but unheld, waiting to take the shape of whoever lived in it. My phone lit up with my mother's name. I watched it. I let it ring. She called again at 8:31, then my father at 8:47, which told me she had reported the situation and he had decided to try his own hand at it. His call had the brief, confident duration of a man who does not expect to be sent to voicemail. He was. I imagine the morning unfolded the way mornings do when a system fails without warning. The small things first. The things so routine they had stopped being noticed as things at all. The grocery delivery that did not arrive because the account was closed. The Wi-Fi that loaded slowly and then slower. The basic plan revealing itself immediately as insufficient for a household that had grown accustomed to something better. My father's car insurance renewal reminder arriving in his email for the first time in 2 years, addressed to him, requiring his attention, offering no one else to hand it to. Bruce called at 9:15. His message was short, just, "Hey, call me when you get a chance," in the careful tone of someone who is not yet sure what he is dealing with. Frances did not call, which did not surprise me. Frances would wait to see how things developed before deciding on her position. By mid-morning, my mother had called 3 more times. The voicemails began. The first one was measured. "Carrie, just checking in, we noticed you weren't here this morning," with a studied casualness that did not quite land. The second was less measured. The third had the brittle, slightly elevated quality of a woman who has begun to understand that something has actually happened, and that understanding has not yet resolved into any particular emotion. I listened to all 3 while eating lunch at my new kitchen table. The window faced east. The light was good. Somewhere across the city, a household was discovering for the first time what it actually took to run itself. I opened my afternoon client files and got back to work. By the 3rd day, the voicemails had changed in character entirely. The careful casualness of the first morning was gone. In its place was something rawer and less rehearsed. The sound of people encountering a problem they had no framework for, because the problem had never been allowed to exist before. My mother's messages cycled through registers I recognized from childhood. The reasonable tone she used when she wanted something, the wounded tone she used when the reasonable tone didn't work, and finally, the flat, tired voice that meant she had run out of performances and was simply stating her distress directly. That last one was the most honest she had sounded in years. My father left 2 messages that I suspected had taken him considerable effort to record. He was not a man who made requests easily. Requests required acknowledging need, and acknowledging need required acknowledging that something had gone wrong on his watch. Both messages were structured as though the situation were a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, something that could be resolved with a brief and reasonable conversation. He used the word overreaction in the second one. I noted it without surprise and moved on. Bruce escalated from "call me when you get a chance" to 3 increasingly direct texts over 48 hours, the last of which said simply, "This is affecting Mom and Dad, Carrie," as though that were an argument, as though the fact of their distress were a debt I was refusing to pay, rather than a consequence I had declined to prevent. Francis, I was told secondhand through a message Bruce eventually left, had not yet moved into the office because there was apparently a question now about the Wi-Fi and some other logistics that had not been sorted. I found this information mildly interesting and did not follow up on it. What struck me, listening to the accumulated messages on the 4th evening, was how little any of them engaged with the substance of what had happened. No one said we should not have given away your office without asking. No one said we did not understand what you were carrying for us. The calls were entirely focused on the inconvenience of my absence, the bills, the accounts, the things that needed handling, as though I were a service that had gone offline and simply needed to be rebooted. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood at my east-facing window for a while. The city moved steadily below, indifferent and continuous. I had spent 29 years making myself available to people who only noticed me when I wasn't. I found I was done with that. 10 days of calls, 10 days of voicemails, 10 days of a family discovering, too late, what they had thrown away. There is one message left, and what I did when I heard it will close this story for good. Stay with me. The final voicemail came on a Thursday, 10 days after I left. It was my father. I could tell from the first second, not from his voice alone, but from the silence before he spoke. The particular pause of a man who has exhausted his other options and arrived at something he did not expect to have to do. He sounded tired. He sounded older than I had been allowing myself to picture him. And underneath both of those things, still present, still structural, was the anger. Not hot the way it might have been in a younger man, but settled and cold, the kind that has decided it is justified. He said I had been selfish. He said I had abandoned my family over a room. He said that what I had done, leaving without a conversation, without warning, without any apparent concern for how it would affect the people who loved me, was something he had not expected from me, and that he hoped I understood the damage I had caused. He said my mother was not doing well. He said Bruce was having to step in on things he should not have to manage. He said Francis was upset, though he did not specify about what. He said he did not understand me. That last part I believed completely. He had not understood me for a very long time, possibly ever. And I had spent years shrinking and adjusting and absorbing, trying to make myself legible to people who had never genuinely tried to read me. The voicemail was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. I listened to all of it, standing in my kitchen in the early morning light, coffee in hand, the apartment quiet around me in the way it had already begun to feel like mine. When it ended, I stood still for a moment. I thought about the room at the end of the hall, the cracked-legged chair, the hardwood floor I had found under the carpet, the lock I had installed because I needed one place in that house that was only mine. I thought about 3 years of Sunday dinners and absorbed costs and services rendered without acknowledgement. I thought about a table where a decision had been announced and no one had thought to ask me anything. Then I set the phone face down on the counter. I carried my coffee to my desk. I opened my laptop. A client had sent overnight files that needed review by noon, and the morning light was good, and the apartment was quiet, and the work was waiting. I began. Not with anger, not with grief, with the steady, unhurried focus of someone who finally had exactly the space she needed.